Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of We Got Your Mac. I'm your host, Victoria Barber, and today I'm joined as my co-host by Scott Smith.
Hey, Victoria. I'm really excited to be here today. I know this episode is going to be very interesting because we're talking about Apple Intelligence and Microsoft Recall and sort of how the two compare to each other. There's been so much discussion around AI in general, and it's interesting. I was reading an article the other day about consulting firms and how much investment they've been putting into their AI consultants because everybody out there is looking for someone to come tell them about AI and how they should be using it. And they compared it to the dot-com boom where business leaders around the world were saying, I don't know what a website is. I don't know what it can do for my business, but I need one. And I feel like that's sort of the attitude now with AI is everybody's sort of saying, I don't really know what this is or what it can do, but I need it. Especially with the way AI tools work right now, I think that there's a little more discussion that needs to be had around security and that kind of thing. So I think any kind of analysis that we can put out there around security concerns and things like that, I think is going to be really good.
Well, good news is that we've got some great guests today. They're going to talk specifically about those security and privacy concerns that have been raised about both solutions since they were both launched. So really exciting conversation coming up, I'm sure. And with that, I think it's time to talk to our guests. This week, we're talking about Apple Intelligence and Microsoft Recall. Now, they were both announced a few weeks ago. There's been a lot of interest in both of them, and both of them are relevant to any organization that is using Mac at scale. Because there's been so much discussion about them online and with our customers, I wanted to talk to a couple of people about it. So I've got with me today Brad Bowers, who is a current colleague. You may remember him from episode 5, where we talked generally about security for Mac in the enterprise. He's a cybersecurity expert with a law enforcement background. We've also got Jonathan Kerr, who's an ex-colleague of mine from my time at Gartner. He's now an independent consultant, and he has the intriguing LinkedIn ID of computer crime. So I've asked them to join me today so that we can discuss the topic and we can separate the FUD from the fact. Thank you for being here with us today, Brad and Jonathan. And I'd like to start by asking you to share your initial reactions to these two announcements.
I guess I'll start by saying in both instances, these are kind of exciting technologies. You have both Microsoft and Apple really jumping on to the generative AI bandwagon. Both have had some AI solution pieces within their technology stacks, but I think this is an exciting time. And like anything, AI is generating a bit of concern and skepticism and, as Victoria said, fear, uncertainty, and doubt around how these technologies will be both secured and how effective they will be, both from helping on the business side of the equation, as well as how useful they'll be for users in their day-to-day lives. So interesting times, to say the least.
Definitely. Some of the reactions have certainly been very extreme in both directions. There's been sort of the direction of, hey, well, there's no such thing as privacy anymore, and others that, this is really intrusive. Now, you're both security experts. You've both been in this field for a long time. What are the real concerns we should be focusing on in terms of security and privacy rather than some of the details that are coming out that maybe aren't the priorities? Maybe, Brad, you could start with, teasing out some of the things you've been discussing with clients recently.
Yeah, so, with both of these technologies, the first thing everybody comes down to is, well, it sounds like it's got an incredible amount of features and functionalities. It's going to help me be more productive. And all that is true. And then the next obvious question is, well, how does this get secured? And I think we're going to see a lot of adaptation over the next 6 months and probably a year. But right now, the primary concerns are how is data being stored within these AI generative engines on each of the operating systems? How protected is it from conventional malware or ransomware and other forms of just data theft. And what is it going to mean from a privacy perspective? And what you find is that the approaches taken by Microsoft and Apple are very different. For instance, Apple's approach in this has been very consumer driven. And they have an advantage that we can talk about in a little bit because of their control of the ecosystem. But their approach has been productivity from the standpoint of efficiency, fun, keeping it kind of light while baking in the security around the solution. Microsoft's stance is a little bit different. Their approach to this is more from a business productivity perspective. And that, of course, means blending in the products that most organizations leverage for correspondence, from email to O365 solutions to things that maybe other applications on the system. So the challenges and the approaches are kind of different between both companies.
I think Brad made an excellent summary of the high level. I guess I looked at it from the point of view of an attacker. And in both systems, both Apple AI and in the Microsoft offering, both of them have a weak point, which I think is the endpoint. So in both cases, unauthorized activities, malware, I think is a problem. And although we don't necessarily hear or think that much about malware in the Apple's ecosystem, and the code signing helps, and some of the permission models do help, nevertheless, malware exists in both the Microsoft and Apple worlds. The other thing that's interesting, and I found this out in my days doing forensic investigations, Apple makes heavy use of configuration files called plist files. And if you've delved into your operating system, you'll notice there are all sorts of different files called .plist. These are all SQLite databases. SQLite is a very handy, lightweight database, and you can store anything in it. And I found back in my days that iPhone backups onto an Apple Mac contained all sorts of useful things like the locations where the iPhone had been. This is really easy to grab. There are all these different tools, in both worlds, that can, as I say, exploit this endpoint weakness. And I think the thing where everyone has become sensitized and alerted to the challenge is where we can replay events. So in both these cases, they grab screenshots to, again, assist you in recalling your workflow, to assist you in saying, oh, this is where I was, this is where I'm going. So there's a positive use. But of course, the negative side of that, if I can grab those as an attacker, I can also replay your workflow. I can replay where everything you were doing on your machine. I think what this plays into is when these tools came out in the employee monitoring space, there was a significant backlash. We remember the backlash when we got emails from Cortana saying, here's the emails you need to pay attention to. And everyone went, oh, look. And it said, oh, this is how productive you were. And everyone went, oh, help. These tools are not precise. And it is this imprecision and this fear of misuse of these tools that also plays into the concern. It's not just the attacker sharing data, it's what if in this age of mass layoffs and general fear of economic fear and instability, what if these tools are misused by a overeager employer?
I think it's interesting because I've always kept my personal devices and my work devices separate, but there are a lot of people, I think, who will quite happily use their work device for the odd bit of personal activity because it saves them time and effort, and most employers are reasonably okay with it as long as you don't do anything naughty. I don't know what the two of you think about it. I don't know about you, Brad, because I know you talk to a lot of customers about issues around bring your own device. Does this feed into that conversation as well? Is it going to make people more reluctant to use their personal devices for work, just as I'm reluctant to use my work device for personal activity?
First off, most people shouldn't be leveraging their personal device for work use simply because the controls that are typically implemented on a business machine are usually quite different than those that are on a personally owned computer, regardless if it's Windows or Mac. But I wanted to hit on something that John said. The approaches to the security on both of these solutions is different. And John hit on a very important point. On the Microsoft side, they are stored, the data collected from Recall and really from Microsoft's AI solution overall is stored in a SQLite system, unencrypted on the local device. So to that point, local device security becomes very, very important. And the notion of, well, it's secure because that device is encrypted. Well, it's only encrypted at rest, meaning that when that device is turned off, you have a pretty good expectation for privacy, and it would be much more difficult for an attacker to be able to acquire anything on it. That's not the case when the machine is running. And I think to what John had mentioned earlier, malware, more importantly, info stealers, which is a prominent part. In fact, Mac Stealer is still running rampant out there and being leveraged against endpoints both on the personal side as well as on the business side. And these tools specifically are designed to focus on screen scraping, collecting, and aggregating data off business and personal machines, which makes them a perfect target or tool, to John's point, to be leveraged by an attacker to try to collect data that may be on these systems. Apple's is a little bit different. So Apple is stating that it will be actually encrypted on the device at rest and in transit. How that's all going to be implemented, I don't think is completely clear quite yet, but it will be stored in a local database and it will be leveraged in a very similar way. So both have pros and cons from both a security and privacy perspective. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this all develops over time.
Your Macs are brilliant. Is your security? Your teams are flying through tasks with AI-powered Macs. The speed? Mind-blowing. The productivity? Unstoppable. But here's the thing. Every AI app expands your attack surface. Every new vulnerability is a threat your team can't afford. That's where the SHI Security Posture Review comes in. It's X-ray vision for your entire IT infrastructure, from network to cloud. Uncover the hidden threats AI can introduce, from unauthorized access to data breaches. We'll help you assess vulnerabilities, strengthen your data loss prevention, and fortify your multi-factor authentication strategies. Protect your data with a detailed action plan with tailored security recommendations for bulletproof Mac security. No more guessing games, no more sleepless nights. Just a clear path to fortifying your environment against evolving threats. It's time to unleash the full potential of your Macs without compromising on security. Take the first step. Get your free SHI security assessment today. SHI, securing brilliance, one Mac at a time. Visit shi.com/security review today.
This isn't just about these specific products. There's an overall need for us to really think about our data governance as part of our AI strategy, because AI is nothing without the data, right? If we haven't got good data governance in place, then the quality of the work from the AI is a problem. But also, I think some of the things we've been seeing with the initial rush to use it is people perhaps haven't been thinking about that. And then there's been a bit of reaction of, well, hang on a minute, where is this data going? What's happening with it? What controls should we put around it? What have you been seeing around that, John?
I think the accent upon release we've seen is on availability and usability. And I think that the clear message from the world out there is that both Microsoft and Apple need to think about some governance and need to think about some controls. It's interesting, as you point out, Brad, that this idea that Apple say, oh, don't worry, this database is encrypted. As I said, it's not something they've done for any other file that floats around inside the Apple operating system. And of course, with every encryption operation, there's an overhead. So again, is this going to slow down Apple AI, or is there going to be any kind of performance bottleneck? And only time will tell. I think there is always a concern about data going outside the governance boundary of the organization. This is true in both the Apple universe and the Microsoft universe. And I think it's true anywhere where sensitive information is handled, which means this is true for government, for finance. This is true for high-tech, pharma. This is true for the creative industries as well. Anywhere they're thinking there is valuable intellectual property that, in many cases, organizations have contractually agreed or have been regulated to say this information will not pass outside our governance boundary, then you have to again look at these tools very carefully indeed.
Let's break that down a little bit. The approaches here is really what makes the difference between both the data governance side of this, the data privacy side, and just the general privacy of the user overall. And I think we'll see how these both play out, but here's what we know so far. So Microsoft, because of just how their environment is set up in the typical business environment, has some significant advantages to this. Most Windows machines on the business side leverage things like GPOs. They leverage controls that are native to the Microsoft operating system, which frankly are pretty effective when it comes to managing a business environment. So those controls will allow businesses to make some really good decisions around how they allow generative AI around Copilot, even Recall, to be managed and supported. On the Apple side, based on what we've seen so far, it's going to go a couple directions deeper that may introduce some higher concern, if you will, from a security perspective. For instance, since Apple AI will leverage across both tablets, phones, and the laptops and computers, they're offering the capability to even copy and record conversations. So the benefit of that sounds really cool. Hey, take a conversation that I was having with somebody on a phone call, distill it for me into some pertinent notes, and then give me a rundown of what it was so I can use it for notes tomorrow or something like that. Sounds really good from a business perspective. Sounds really creepy from a privacy perspective. So how Apple is going to address that and build security around it is going to be interesting.
I think one of the things that you bring up, the desire to capture everything. And let's say, for example, you said record a series of phone calls, distill the notes. How about record a few phone calls? Let me know which client sounds more eager to buy. Well, that's interesting. However, again, sentiment is an interest. How about record the one-on-one calls I have with each of my team members? Let me know which team member seems least engaged and perhaps is, the one I should be thinking about putting into the layoff program. So again, as you say, this privacy is, well, certainly it's something which is changing and mutating as technology innovates. I think the other thing is that the idea of what is acceptable and what can we accept can be done is again very different. We don't have many, if you like, legal defenses against the usage of new technologies and tools. So really we're relying on, ethical goodwill in the most part for the people will do the right thing rather than the wrong thing.
So it sounds like then rather than being concerned about AI and the singularity and the extermination of humanity by the machines, I need to be worrying about a few more rather immediate and realistic things with how these technologies are going to be implemented, and whether organizations are going to be focused on making sure they do the right thing for the individual as well as the organization. And sometimes there are going to be conflicts where the right thing for the organization is not the right thing for the individual, and they're going to have to be compromises made. On that basis, if you were advising vendors and customer organizations as to what they should do to manage the risks, but also address the FUD that we've identified, what would be your top 3 brief pieces of advice as to where they should focus?
Sure. First, we would be slow roll the adoption of technology across sensitive business areas or functions. Obviously, this technology, because it's still relatively new, it's gotten a heightened lens on it from both the bug and the vulnerability community. Security researchers around the world have already identified things like prompt attacks that are being leveraged on AI systems to either A, get them to crash, if you will, or B, get them to avoid or get around the bumpers that have been put in place to kind of protect information that the AI is not designed to give up. I think we're going to see more of that. So the first one, of course, slow roll it out to systems that may be of high sensitivity. The second one is going to be reevaluating the security controls that are being leveraged around the endpoint itself. As it stands today, we know the endpoint is going to be the primary target for malicious actors to try to steal data, screen scrape, or use malware to try to collect things from these solutions like Recall and Apple AI. And the third one is the monitoring aspect. There's a component here that we've been hitting on, the data protection, and tagging of data within AI is still in its infancy. Understanding how data should be tagged from a data loss prevention perspective is still kind of being thought out. So I think companies need to look at those 3 areas and figure out what's important to them, how they're going to ensure the security of both the user as well as the data that's being collected in these AI solutions.
I agree with Brad. The endpoint is the weak point. And the reason is, as you say, is if you can inject transactions from an endpoint with an authorized identity operating it, then your opportunities as a bad actor are greatly increased. I think in this case, what we're talking about is, say, what information can be captured. Screen grabbing is not new. There have been screen grabbing tools since time immemorial, and indeed there have been employee monitoring solutions that deploy screen grabbing and key logging for the purposes to which they are put. I think the risk that we're seeing here is that these tools are being portrayed as useful, valuable productivity tools. And I think that's what, as Brad said, the security researchers out there are saying, hey, while these may well have great value, be aware that the way they work may compromise your privacy, may compromise any confidential work that you're doing. And I think it's an attempt to raise awareness of the dual-edged nature of this tool.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I'm sure it's a topic we're going to be hearing a lot more about as AI really starts to get a foothold within organizations. Okay, so there's an awful lot that we covered in that conversation. I think the first thing that we need to bear in mind that there's always a lot of stuff that rises to the surface that essentially is FUD. Okay, people are scared of AI, of what it's going to do. They're scared about privacy. They're scared about security. And we always seem to approach things from that fear, uncertainty, and doubt perspective. So the first thing I think we learned is we've got to be pragmatic about this and do our research and look at it properly.
Yeah, and I think it's no surprise that the initial focus, as they mentioned, is sort of on availability and usability rather than the security around it. And I think that's the mindset of sort of, move fast, break things has really permeated this entire thing. And I think it's good to kind of slow down. Like they mentioned, Brad mentioned slow roll the technology. Don't just start letting everybody use it. We really need to take a look at it before we start deploying it.
Yeah. And actually, we've got to look at the use cases because, you've got to look at the security side of things, but as you said before we went into the conversation, it was everybody wants it. They don't know what it is. So we've actually got to look at those use cases. Where do we need it? Who's going to be using it? Both Brad and Jonathan agreed that the endpoint device is probably the weakest point. Actually, I think they were being kind, because it's not really the device that's the weak point, is it? It's the operator of the device that is most often the weak point that can be exploited.
Yeah, absolutely. There was also a really great article written by John Gruber, who is a really big name in the Apple community, about Apple Intelligence and sort of how it's built and the gist of it. And I'll go into more detail on this in the blog post. So definitely look at go to wegotyourmac.com and check out the blog post. But Apple Intelligence, while it's marketed as one big thing, it is actually multiple smaller models all working in tandem to create that sort of contextual ability that it will have when it's fully fleshed out next year. And so I think it's really interesting and something to keep in mind as far as the differences between the two systems. Apple Intelligence is a pretty unique approach that they're taking.
Yeah, and I think we're certainly going to have more discussions about both of these technologies as we go through. Over the next 6 to 12 months, we'll probably have some conversations about some of the other AI tools that we're seeing out there as well. So there's a lot to think about at the moment. Lots of exciting new things happening in technology. Thanks for joining us this week, Scott. Look forward to reading the blog post. That's all for this episode. For our listeners, if you want to find out where you can see more episodes, find other resources, including Scott's blog posts, visit wegotyourmac.com and make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss any of the upcoming episode. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.